Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 305 of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel we have Dave Kimura.
How's it going?
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. I just want to quickly shout out about Ruby Remote Comp. This week we're going to be talking about Rails 1 or 5.1.0. And Dave, you put together a video on Drifting Ruby about this. You want to kind of give us a thumbnail sketch and get us going on what we're discussing here?
Yeah, Rails 5.1.0, it's a huge update. I really think that this is one of their bigger releases that they've done, other than the major versions. They've included so many different things as well as deprecated a lot of different methods. One of the biggest things, that I know that the community that we're kind of moving towards, or the community just kind of what they have seemed to like is, a lot more JavaScript front-end stuff. And now with the additions of stuff like Yarn and Webpack, it makes it a lot easier to start off a vanilla Rails application with this stuff kind of baked in and included. And they've added a lot more things I'm excited to talk about today. And I think it's a great move forward without compromising the, what Rails stands for and its overall integrity, to kind of give you the option to choose the direction that you want to go while still maintaining the convention of configuration or convention over configuration.
Yeah. So one thing that I just want to talk about here for a second is going back to that idea around JavaScript and that front-end JavaScript. Given that this is a web framework and the direction that the web is going, this is really exciting that they are moving in this direction where you can now actually pull in packages for web applications and then, use something like Webpack to build stuff. I always felt like the asset pipeline worked, but it was a little bit clunky, and it's nice that they're just adopting some open source software that pretty much a lot of the rest of the web uses, and then getting all the goodies that come with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey there, this is Charles Max Wood, and I just wanted to talk to you really briefly about Freelance Remote Conf. I'm putting on a conference for people who want to go freelance or who are freelance, and bringing in some of the experts from the Freelancer Show to talk to you about how to find clients, how to collect money, how to build your business, how to specialize, and much, much more. So if you're thinking about going freelance, or you're already freelance and want to hear from the experts on how to go, become, or grow your freelancing business, then by all means, come check us out at freelanceremoteconf.com. And then getting all the goodies that come with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea with Yarn, and one of the really cool things about it, and for the listeners who don't know, Yarn is just it's kind of like Bundler for JavaScript, where it's just a package manager. So you can easily install other packages or JavaScript libraries into your Rails application, like Full Calendar or any other kind of JavaScript library, with these. And you can also use it to maintain and update the different versions. So they've definitely made it a lot nicer than having to go out, find that library source, pull it into your vendor assets, and then, redo everything, then run your system tests. They made it much more integrated now, and that's what I really like. I haven't quite drank the Webpack Kool-Aid yet. It's still kind of iffy. It still has some issues with it, but, that's neither here nor later, but we'll see what happens with it.
I really like Webpack. I've been using it with Angular stuff for a while, and it's pretty awesome. You just pull in what you need and then you run it, and it seems to generally work. There are a lot of config options. There's a huge surface area to the API, but ultimately it has plugins for pretty much everything you need to do with it. So it's a nice way to go there. I'm curious, though. I haven't used Yarn. So what's the difference between Yarn and NPM?
I don't know if there is any kind of major difference that you need to. I guess Yarn is maybe just the front end or kind of the interface for using NPM. I'm not really too much of a JavaScript guy to really be able to notice or know the difference. But on the changelog or on the blog post that they have, the first point is to manage JavaScript dependencies from npm via Yarn. So it sounds like Yarn is kind of like your bundler, and npm is just kind of the back end side of things.
Yeah, but npm includes dependency management. And so that's kind of where I'm.
It does, which is kind of strange. Now it's not until someone actually like calls something out or says something do I really stop and think like, yeah, what is going on there? But and honestly, to date, the Rails core team has never failed me. And while I do not agree with everything that they do in some instances, I think for the most part, when they do introduce a big new technology into their core Rails app, that it's usually pretty solid and good.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, there are some areas that I just they do stuff and I'm just like, okay. But then in other areas, they generally have the right of things, until I move on to something else. So one example is CoffeeScript, for example. I loved it when they adopted CoffeeScript, but I felt like there have been other options that are at least better for me that have come out since then, primarily ES6 and TypeScript. And so, as I move away from that, sometimes it's not as easy to integrate some of those other options in. And that's one of the things that I'm really excited about with using something like Webpack, is that Webpack, like I said, has all those plugins. So integrating that stuff is just a matter of pulling in the TypeScript plugin and then making sure that the Webpack build does what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, and I think one of my main issues with Webpack, with how they have it integrated into the Rails application right now in this beta, or I guess now it's a release candidate 1 at the time of this recording, is that you have to run a separate instance or a separate server to actually be able to serve out those assets. And I think that's kind of, especially when you start working on a much larger application where you need to be testing your background job. So, maybe you have Sidekick running, then you have a Redis server, then you have, of course, your database server running, your Rails application. Now you have an extra component where you had to have the Webpack service running to serve your assets. It just seems, just one more thing that I have to worry about almost. And that's kind of why at least in Rails 5.10, I haven't completely bought into Webpack yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, it works behind the scenes. I haven't actually tried to integrate any of these things into it, but it appears to work primarily behind the scenes. So, I don't know how much configuration or know-how you need with Webpack to make things work, at least in the basic case. As you want to configure it to do other things, I mean, you had to fiddle with Rails to make it do ES6 or TypeScript or something else anyway, and it didn't always work seamlessly. So, you may run into some of those same issues, but at least Webpack is designed to handle that stuff.
Yeah, and I guess from that perspective, it does just work within Rails 5.10. If you run the Webpack dev server, so from that perspective, yes, it's a lot less trying to tinker and to get it to work. You don't have to worry about your initializer files or any kind of configurations. You just run the server and it works. So from that perspective, it is definitely much nicer. I guess I just kind of want it all.
Yeah.
So.
No, I totally understand. The other thing I thought was interesting, though, was that you can actually do a Webpack equals on your option. So -- Webpack equals Angular or Vue or React, and it'll actually pull in all the stuff that you need there.
Yeah, that is really cool. So I think that's going to, for those who are still, really sold on the action view, I think this is going to kind of be a case where if it's that simple to get up and running with Vue or React or Angular within a new Rails application, that might be a push for more developers to try out these JavaScript front-end frameworks.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, the way that I've done Angular in the past is Angular has its own CLI, and so I would just generate a separate Angular app, and then it would run all its stuff, and then I would just tell it how to talk to a Rails backend. So the fact that I can actually spin up an Angular front end and a Rails backend and kind of have it all automatically talk to each other, because it was kind of tricky sometimes to make it talk to the backend the way I wanted. This makes it really seamless for that.
Yeah, and then you have everything kind of in one nice repo. You don't have to worry about managing two separate things or, whatever. So, yeah, it is pretty cool. One of the previous Ruby Rogue episodes, I kind of said I had this dream about Vue.js, and, I still have that conviction to try it out. Haven't had time yet. I've been busy building a deck, like an actual wooden deck, which is a whole nother story. But it all comes down to power tools, man. But yeah, so. Yeah, the whole JavaScript stuff that came in Rails 5.10 has been pretty amazing. And also dropping the support or the default jQuery as a dependency, I think is pretty huge, especially if you're trying to really get to hit that sub 100 millisecond response, or even the first request, loading up those assets. If you don't need them in there, then reducing that asset.js file size, can definitely be pretty big. I don't know what jQuery comes in as a minified size, but or I guess minified and gzipped, but it's still some overhead. So having that not as a default dependency anymore is pretty cool. Yeah,
that made me happy. I mean, and it's funny because I remember when I first started doing web development, it was shortly after jQuery had come out, and so we were doing stuff with Prototype.js, and then moved to jQuery, and it was, oh, this is so nice. And it's funny to me now that it's like, oh yay, I don't have to use jQuery anymore.
Yeah, I remember the Prototype days, and maybe that's when I started to really hate JavaScript just as a whole. I had some bad experiences with Prototype back in the day.
Yeah, but it's it's getting better and better, and as you pull in some of these frameworks like React or Angular or Vue, they handle a lot of the DOM cruft, the stuff that you don't really need to know or don't need to want to know for you, and they do it without jQuery. And so if you're pulling in an Angular or a React or a Vue, it just it does the right thing for you. And so, yeah, not having that monolithic library, because it is a fairly large library, it does cut down on that bandwidth that you're taking up. And the other thing is that by not loading a large file like jQuery or jQuery UI into your application, especially on mobile, which accounts for more and more traffic on the web these days, it just makes it that much faster and easier. And so that was definitely a big plus.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're not minifying and gzipping at the, your assets, you're definitely doing something wrong there. Yeah. At least as your CSS and JS files go. So, I mean, that right there is going to be your biggest bang for the buck, and it's free to do too.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that if you're using Webpack, it has plugins for tree shaking, and that'll also make your deliverables smaller. I'm not sure if you're familiar with tree shaking, but
is that kind of like a uncss for JavaScript, where it just removes the unused functions?
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
So yeah, it only works if you're using an ES6 variant, so ES6 or TypeScript. But it can go in, and because of the way that the modules are written and loaded, it'll go through and it'll actually pick out all of the different pieces that you're not using. So it, as far as I know, it doesn't work well with ECMAScript 5. And so, CoffeeScript compiles to ECMAScript 5. It doesn't go through an ES6 system. And so it won't work out as well. But there's a system out there called Rollup. There's a JavaScript Jabber episode on Rollup, and it explains what tree shaking is and how it works. And so I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But yeah, so I mean, again, coming back to Webpack, there are all these options you can pull in, and it has a couple of tree shaking plugins that you can hook up, and it'll reduce that compiled JavaScript file size that much more.
That's cool. Yeah, I'll have to look into that more. Because I always like, trying to get my application to perform as fast as possible, even on the first request. And that definitely sounds like, you can kind of almost blindly just pull in the, whole Bootstrap JavaScript library, and then just kind of have it automatically trim down what's not being used.
Yep. Yeah, and
So,
there are a lot of these frameworks that, like Bootstrap or jQuery or Zurb Foundation or some of these others that, if you're not using all the features, why load them up to the user? Why make them, pay to wait for that file to download?
Yeah, so we're not all in gigabit connections now. Come on, it's 2017. That shouldn't be a problem.
Especially with my phone, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm just waiting for the new version of cellular networks to come out where we do have like insanely fast speeds.
Yeah.
So,
well,
don't know what I'll do with it, but can't wait.
Well, and I think it's funny because, to wax a little bit maybe political for a second, a lot of people are up in arms one way or the over things like net neutrality. And I think, honestly, if it was kind of ubiquitous, wide internet pipe kind of access, I think a lot of those concerns would go away, because you would never max out to the point where you're actually coming up against somebody else using up bandwidth. And so, it just, oh, you're going to make whatever service faster. Well, prioritize away, because, unless you're throttling somebody, it just won't matter.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then, I don't know, all the shady corporate stuff that goes on, I hate it. Like some companies, I won't name them just because I don't know for absolutes, but I heard that they will uncap your bandwidth, so give you like your full speed on like speedtest.net, but then throttle in other areas. I'm like, that's just such crap. Why would you do that? That's not nice.
Yep. Anyway, I led us onto a tangent, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about on Rails 5.1, so...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I agree with you on that. So we've talked a lot about the JavaScript stuff. Is there anything else related to the front end that we should, hit on this? Or should we move on to another area?
Well, they did unify form tag and form for. They kind of bundled it all into form with, which is kind of cool. It kind of takes the guesswork of, do I need to use form tag or form for in these situations? Personally, I use simple forms for most of my things, so it doesn't really matter too much, but I still find myself using form tag for something like a search where I'm not actually referencing a model with that form. But I think, just having, a bit cleaner code and stuff, it's definitely a cool thing.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, it's like, look, I want a form, and let me just tell you what the form is about. Instead of, form for, form with, which one's which, or form for and form tag.
Yeah. So that definitely is a welcome change. Also having the parameterized mailers, I think that's just going to make the whole mailing pipeline just much more dry and cleaner. So have you read up on that much?
I looked at it. I didn't quite see how to call it, as opposed to calling it with parameters. Yeah,
so one, you can reduce the number of parameters that you're requiring for each mailer that you're going to send out, and you can have a before action, which will basically set the instance variables for all of the different common things. But instead of having to pass in the parameters from your controller or your background job into the mailer, it has access to the parameters.
Oh, that's where it's pulling the params from. That was the part I wasn't clear on.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool, I do see where it kind of opens it up to where you can make some more mistakes or get some errors in your app that you wouldn't normally because you were explicitly setting the parameters. But I think it's it should be an interesting move forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just simplifying that much. And then, like you mentioned, the before actions, where it's like, hey, look, I've kind of got some default things, or I know I'm going to want it to set up off of the parameters for all of these or most of these different mailer options. I mean, that just simplifies a ton of stuff. Because then the stuff that I need to do on setup for everything, it just happens. And then the stuff that is different, then I just run that in the method and then tell it which template to run.
Yeah. I guess my biggest gripe with this release candidate 510 is just all the deprecations that they've done. While I can see it's important to clean up some of the legacy code in the Rails core, I think that this release is going to break a lot more applications than even upgrading to Rails 5 from 4. There's just a lot of gems that were using deprecated methods and stuff that I think we're going to have some issues upgrading even from Rails 5 to 510. So if I had to pick one grievance of the whole release, that would be it. I wish they had some kind of better way of moving off the deprecated methods over into maybe a separate gem or something where you can still access them so you can slowly upgrade to a new version. But they kind of just took it away, and now you have to go back and fix gems or submit pull requests for other gems, which isn't a bad thing to keep help keep those maintained, but it's kind of a annoying bit.
Yeah, well, maybe somebody will write a gem that puts them all back and then throws warnings or something at you.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, or maybe you can load the gem and then make some kind of setup call that says start throwing me errors after this date or something. I don't know. But I don't know. I mean, a lot of those are things that I use too, like the render text and some of the other things that they pulled out of there. I was just like, wow, that's kind of been core and been there forever.
Yeah, which I can see, a lot of their reasons for deprecating a lot of those, but still to have some kind of fallback plan to where you can slowly migrate, so at least you're on the latest version of Rails. You're just still using some, not even security related issues, but you're still using some of the old deprecated methods just because you haven't had time to update a gem or your application, but you're still getting the latest security fixes and all that stuff if you're coming from a more unsupported version of Rails or something.
Is there a full list of the deprecated methods?
I don't think so. Or at least, if you go to the change logs for each one of the different main packages, you can, kind of see them in the change log. That might be a good list to compile just so you can easily search through it. But yeah, maybe I'll have to write a blog post.
Yeah, that could be interesting. But anyway, I'm looking through the change log just to see, and most of these are things that they've added or changed as opposed to things that they've pulled out. And so
yeah,
I'm not seeing a list of things that were actually deprecated. And so yeah, I don't know. It'd definitely be interesting to see.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of stuff removed from action support. So,
yeah, well, and that's going to affect more things than just Rails, because there are a lot of systems out there that use active support because they just assume that people are used to the Rails stuff, and so they want all those goodies in Ruby in general, and so other gems and other systems pull that in. So that should be interesting. But yeah.
Yeah, and I've been...
Hey everybody, this is Charles Max Wood. I just wanted to talk to you really briefly about JS Remote Conf. We just picked speakers. Things are looking really good, and we're really excited to cover a broad range of topics for JavaScript developers. So if you're looking to learn things about Node.js, about becoming a better developer, about deployment, about mobile development, and much more about JavaScript, then come check us out, jsremoteconf.com. You can also find it by going to devchat.tv/conferences and then picking the conference you want. We have last year's recordings there. We have this year's conference coming up, so make sure you get your ticket, and we'll see you there. That should be interesting. But yeah.
Yeah, and I've been playing around with Capybara for a bit, to kind of shift topics, but there's the system test within Rails 5.10, which is really cool. I really like that.
Yeah, I looked at that. I watched your Drifting Ruby video on it too, and you kind of showed it off. Man, if you've written Capybara, there's not a whole lot that's changed, but just the fact that it all sort of works and you don't have to go and, include Capybara and then include the driver and then jump through all these hoops and then, configure RSpec and then make it all play nice. It just kind of all does the right thing. That's super nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the more exciting things that, I found in Rails 5.1. It actually makes me kind of want to write tests for my applications now. So, I'm so bad about writing tests. I'm so bad about it. I do on the mission critical point of things, but as far as any kind of acceptance test with, like Capybara or, like a Selenium driver to test the app, I really don't do that too much. It's more just unit tests or RSpecs, not really actually pulling up a driver, loading a web page, and kind of step through the process. So,
yeah.
I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? I'm so bad about writing tests because it's all right, I have 2 hours. I want to get this feature in. Okay, I'm done with the feature. Crap, out of time. Don't have time to write the acceptance test for it. So, it's almost kind of an afterthought sometimes.
So as far as the system level tests go, for those, I generally just write the happy path tests because they take longer to run, and so I'm typically not going to run my systems tests as part of my my regular test suite. I usually just run the unit tests and then any integration tests that I need. And usually those integration tests, if they're internal system to internal system, then I just run them. And if they connect to some external system, then I'll run VCR, and that way those are fast as well. Then when it comes down to the actual hit it and run through it. It essentially has to virtualize a browser, and it's just not as fast. So with those, I'm not running them all the time. And so it's if it's not mission critical, it typically won't get one of those system tests. But yeah, for me, it's just the approach of, hey, what is this supposed to do? And I like to write my tests first because a lot of times I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, how do I do this? And so if I can start to characterize it a little bit and say, if I put these things in, then it should have these side effects and these outputs. And that's typically where my tests start. And then it's, okay, so I need something that does this piece of this, this piece of the process. And so I'll jump in and write that part that actually does that part of the process. And it's the same thing, right? Given these inputs and these existing conditions outside of the method, what are the side effects and what are the outputs? And then I can just test all those things, and I just work through it that way over and over and over again. But yeah, I know people that write the system tests for everything, but typically what they do is they run that on their CI build before they deploy.
Yeah.
And then they also parallelize their tests so that if it's an hour's worth of tests to be run and they have 4 cores, then it can run it in 15 minutes.
Yep. Yeah. Man, writing tests, it is actually kind of fun, and it kind of gives you that good fuzzy feeling that, yes, the application is working as I intended. So, tests are good.
Yep.
And system tests, with the Capybara, I'm really excited to play with that a lot more.
Yeah, but just the fact that they cleaned a lot of that stuff up so you don't have to bang your head against the wall. That was just nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
One other area that I saw that I was super excited about were the encrypted secrets. I keep, you hear about these websites getting hacked, and then you put all your secrets into the secrets.yaml, but it's a plain text file that you deploy to your server. Or if you're not doing that, then typically what you wind up doing is you either wind up putting it in environment variables, which if they can get onto your machine, they can ask the system for those if they know the names. And the names are all in those files, so it's not that hard to figure out what those secrets are. Or the other thing is just the step of putting it anyway. It's kind of convoluted. So the fact that you can encrypt the secrets and then you put the key on the machine in an environment variable, you can lock that down to some degree. And it makes it a whole lot simpler to keep the stuff that you want to keep secret, even if somebody hops onto your machine and is able to, log in.
Yeah, and that's definitely a cool aspect about it. And I think from a development standpoint, that's going to be really helpful just because, I don't like having my AWS keys in plain text. If I'm just setting out on my development machine, because you can still do a lot of damage with that, if you get those. So I think from that perspective, it's really cool. And for smaller shops, this is definitely going to be a helpful tool because, have you ever deployed a new application only to have it crash because you didn't have a environment variable or something set?
Yeah.
Or you forgot one of those. So now you can kind of do it all in the development phase of things and not even have to worry about it. So from that aspect, it's pretty cool. I think on the enterprise level, because once you get into larger shops or where there's a lot more kind of segregation of roles, developers usually don't have access to production environments. So in that case, the DevOps team is having to give you the secrets to maintain within the Rails application, because it's going into this encrypted secrets. So the DevOps person is either going to have to pull down the Rails application, edit the secrets file, and then make a merge request back into the Rails application, or they're going to have to give the key to the developer to do. So I can see where that kind of starts to create some conflicting roles there. And just managing the secrets. But I think for the most part, it's definitely a great move forward. And it reminds me a lot of the Ansible vaults. So the Ansible vaults is basically where you can check into your code repo the secrets or passwords as well, but it just stores it in a separate encrypted file. Except you don't have a key file. You actually have to have a password that you type in. And so it really works much along the same lines, except the secrets file in Rails 5.10, it requires you to kind of have like a console editor like VI, Nano, Emacs, or whatever, that it'll open up, decrypt the file, and open it up. And as soon as you close it, it re-encrypts it. So you never have to worry about it just kind of sitting out there in plain text.
Yeah. Well, and I just also remember the nightmare, right, of like setting up on Heroku even, where you put everything into environment variables. And so then it's okay, well, I have the database name and the database username and the database password, and then I'm also running something over on Mongo hosting. I don't remember what it is, mongohq.com, I think. And so then I have like 3 or 4 keys for that, and then I have a couple of keys for AWS, and I've got keys for, and so you have like a dozen or 2 dozen of these things. And just to be able to put them all in one file and just look and check and know that they're all there, and then have them encrypted when you commit them to your repo so that they're there. You don't have to do anything other than just deploy it up and then make sure that the key is on the other end. Yeah.
Yeah, so that definitely is definitely reduces the risk for human error, which I think is a good thing in many cases. So, I think it's a welcome change.
Yep.
Let's see. What other new things do they have? Yeah, there were a lot of new features that didn't make it into the main blog post that, I kind of dug around and found in the change logs. And one of them was the support, and, I still use MySQL or MariaDB quite a bit, but the virtual columns. And I think that's going to be, pretty cool to where, it kind of plays on to our other talk about the stored procedures that we had with the DB guy a few weeks ago.
Yeah, Carlos.
Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't remember his name, but being able to offload from your Rails application from doing some kind of calculations and putting on the SQL side, and having it available just as a attribute that you can call on within the Rails side, I think it makes the code a lot cleaner while still giving you that performance boost and the flexibility from your SQL side. So that was a really cool thing. I was excited to see that in there and can't wait to get in there and play around with that a bit more.
Yeah, and see, I'm more on the PostgreSQL or using something like Mongoid or something. And so for me, typically, it's not as much of a thing that I'm getting excited about. But at the same time, just realizing that, it's there if people need it. And a lot of people are using MySQL, and so I'm glad to see that they're supporting options. And mainly for me, the more options you have, the better you can solve your problems. So now you have this other option. You can look at it and say, well, you know what? I really do need that feature in MySQL, so I'm going to pick that instead of going with Postgres or something else. Yeah,
absolutely.
And I find that most of these database options, they'll solve 80 to 90% of your problems. Any of them will. Just depending on how you want to structure your data and how you want to think about the way that it all connects. But, if there's one feature that one of them has that the other doesn't, then, it's nice to be able to pick that one and just make it work. Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, it seems like MySQL is catching up with Postgres and some of those kind of features. Like MySQL 5.7 added in the JSON data type, and stuff like that, where you can just a different data type to be able to store your data, so you don't have to sort as a binary or something.
Yep.
So, I think that's pretty cool. I still can't get over Postgres's the search, just a case sensitivity and stuff like that. That still just kind of bugs me, just having, to find a manual workaround for those kind of things. Mm-hmm. But I think that that bit me one time. I'm like, I hate Postgres, but that is my poor logic of why I don't use Postgres.
Well, if it matters, then you don't use it, and if it doesn't matter, then you do, right?
Yeah, but one thing I do miss from Postgres, from not having used it, is just a full text search within there. Instead I have to spin up like a Elasticsearch service or something like that to, get that functionality.
Yep, absolutely.
But, yeah, so just one of those things. Yeah, another thing, and I don't know how this is really going to affect my day-to-day, but just the change from eRubinus to eRuby, just for parsing the ERB files. I guess that, I don't know if it's going to be a speed increase on the application side, but it's nice to see that they have dropped eRubis in favor of something that's currently supported or maintained.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I didn't realize that eRubis had been abandoned, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
So just seeing that, I was like, oh, okay. Ultimately, yeah, if it works, I'm not that worried about it. And, if it's faster, that's a bonus. But I don't know how measurably, different it's going to be. So... yeah, I wasn't like, yay! I was just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, well, it's good to see that the Rails core team is doing that kind of due diligence, where they're making sure that if they are using some kind of dependency, that it is being maintained and it, is going to be almost like kind of future proofing. So, I like seeing that out of that team. So, kudos to them.
Yeah, well, the other thing is that, I don't want to have to worry about, oh, well, if it's not being maintained, then, does it have security issues? I mean, because, my brain goes to the worst case scenario, and the worst case scenario is it's not being maintained. Am I going to get hacked?
Yeah.
And the fact that I can just, okay, they're onto something that's maintained, that makes me happy.
Yeah, definitely a good move. So I can't think of any of the other things that they've added in. I know there's so much more, but I think those were like the big highlight points.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the fact that they're still moving ahead. I mean, there's so much discussion around. Is Rails going to still be relevant? And people worry too about whether or not DHH, because DHH is very opinionated, and a lot of his opinions are things that people just don't agree with, or they feel like kind of hold Rails back in some ways. And so it's like, okay, well, are they going to move ahead in ways that matter? And I think this is a pretty clear shout out of, they get where things are going, and this is a big step in that direction.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that just because I want something and I would love to see it baked into the Rails core, if it's not a globally beneficial change, then it's going to hurt Rails more so in the long run if, we add that kind of stuff in. So I think that he does try to keep he does do a good job of trying to keep a objective mind on, is this going to be globally beneficial to everybody, or we can hit the masses as a global beneficial. So I think that's, it's really tough to do sometimes, or at least to take a, very specific concept and make it abstract enough to where it will be globally beneficial. So, it's a tough job.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, anything else that we should hit before we go to picks?
Not that I can think of. I mean, we had some good discussions there.
Yeah. One thing that did come to mind just briefly was the fact that I just switched. I am no longer a Mac person, I guess. I still have the MacBook Pro, but I just set up a new desktop machine, and I just built it myself because it was way cheaper, and I don't get the little canister with 10 million things hanging off of it for the Mac Pro. Because I'm sitting in my office 99% of the time when I'm doing work or doing podcasts. And so what I'm wondering is do all of these features work on Windows? Like if I go install Rails 5.1 on Windows, am I going to be able to install Yarn? Am I going to be able to do some of these other things that are going to work? I mean, Yarn runs on Node, so I'm assuming that it does. But, some of these other features, are they going to work, or am I kind of in trouble?
Well, you do have a couple of options. I would not consider installing Rails on your actual Windows environment as a good option, because chances are you're going to be hosting on a Unix style computer, Debian, CentOS, or whatever else. But there is Bash for Windows, which is available. Last year, I think it was June, in one of their big updates in Windows 10, they added Bash for Windows. And I haven't played around with that too much, but it does look very promising, and it's getting better and better. Yeah,
it's still a beta feature. And I've wound up going to 3 different Microsoft developer conferences last year. For JavaScript Jabber, they invited us out. And it's just been interesting to see that. And I know that that's there. I don't know, though, if it has like full-on LVM or GCC support, for building some of the extensions that Rails sometimes depends on, depending on what you're doing with it. And I'm also not sure, as far as tooling goes and things like that, just exactly how that's going to work. I kind of want to set it up just to see what the hangups are these days, because I know that it's way better than 10 years ago when I started doing Rails. But it should be interesting, and I'm always curious. Do they push a Rails 5.1.0 release and then figure out some of these issues on Windows, or do they have people complaining to them right now for some of these things, and then they go, okay, we'll fix that, and we'll fix that, and we'll fix that, and actually treat them as blockers until they get it out.
Yeah. So if you're on a Windows computer, and if you don't want to kind of drink the Bash for Windows Kool-Aid just yet, just out of fear for compatibility, then check out Docker. Docker is a great alternative, and actually just recorded this past weekend, or I guess at the time of this recording, a Docker for Windows intro, to where I have a fairly vanilla Rails application using some external sources like MySQL and Redis, and just building a Docker file that will be able to install and run your Rails application within Linux containers on your Windows PC, but then you still have access to your application on the Windows side to edit it and use your favorite Sublime text editor or whatever, just natively on the Windows computer. And my point with that is, with Docker and some of the new features of Rails 5.10, you can log into the Docker container, which you can then run your Yarn commands and stuff like that to kind of install the dependencies or packages for the different JavaScript libraries.
Yep.
So
yeah, I actually have VMware workstation on here, so I've actually got a Mac OS and a Ubuntu server set up. And so I'll probably wind up doing some level of the work on those. But yeah, I really do want to see what the experience is like running Ruby on Windows, and just see what, if anything, there are still, where the issues are.
Yeah, and before I got a Mac, back in the day, it was a few years ago, I used VirtualBox to virtualize like a Ubuntu, and then I just create a network share within there to access all the code on my local Windows machine, and then I just kind of transfer it locally on that internal network. So that's how I used to develop my Rails application, but never on a Windows, like solely Windows, without some kind of Linux hypervisor or something like that.
Yeah, I'm just curious to see what the hangups are. The other thing, going back to your point about Docker, and we should probably just do an episode on Docker at some point, but there are actually images out there, so you don't actually have to go out and set up a Docker and edit your Docker file to get PostgreSQL or MySQL running. You can actually just install Docker and then tell it to download and run the Postgres or the MySQL or whatever else, Oracle Docker container, and it'll pull it down and set it up for you. So
yeah, it's really nice.
Easy. And now we're way off in the weeds. So we'll put a note in to talk about this in the future. But yeah,
cool.
All right. Well, why don't we do some picks? Do you want to start us off? Hey there, this is Charles Max Wood, and I just wanted to talk to you really briefly about Freelance Remote Conf. I'm putting on a conference for people who want to go freelance or who are freelance, and bringing in some of the experts from the Freelancer Show to talk to you about how to find clients, how to collect money, how to build your business, how to specialize, and much, much more. So if you're thinking about going freelance, or you're already freelance and want to hear from the experts on how to go, become, or grow your freelancing business, then by all means, come check us out at freelanceremoteconf.com. All right, well, why don't we do some picks? Do you want to start us off with picks?
Well, I am done with my picks on Power Tools. So I think I'm all power tooled out. But one pick I have is a program that I found called Minio. And it is basically a Amazon S3 compliant API that you can host yourself. So I was playing around with this on a application that I have just, for my own personal stuff. And it used S3 on my testing environment, my development environment. And the problem I had was I didn't want to push these files up to S3, even in a test bucket, because that costs money. So I'm out of my year free trial from AWS, so now it's charging me money. This way, I can have my own locally installed S3 compliant API and buckets, and I can just test everything locally without actually having to go out and hit the internet. So it's a pretty cool thing, and it was a drop-in replacement almost for my Rails application. So it's pretty cool. Nice.
Yeah, speaking of that, there was a really interesting talk, and I really want to dig into it some more, but there was a talk at JS Remote Conf, and this isn't AWS specific, but they have a system called Lambda. Azure has Azure Functions. There are a handful of other systems out there that do the same thing. IBM has one. That was what the talk was actually about at JS Remote Conf. But he was talking about using these systems for kind of the one-off sort of job queue kind of things that you would do. And some people have built their entire application. So they have like a really thin web application that just outsources everything to a Lambda function that then integrates with whatever else you have to integrate with on the web. And so I've been looking at a lot of those systems to run some of the things that I want to run. And
that's cool. This actually supports Lambda functions.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So check it out.
I'll have to check it out. That's really cool. But yeah, so that's something that I'm excited about. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure out, because Lambda only supports Node.js and Python, I think. And so I'm trying to figure out how to make the connection to Slack with, because what I want is I want a system that I can essentially hit an endpoint and have it invite somebody to a Slack group. And so I'm trying to figure out how to make that happen with Node.js. And it's been a little less than obvious, but I haven't spent a ton of time digging into it yet either. So anyway, it should be kind of interesting to see how that all works out. But I do like the idea of not having to maintain a system that does it. I just have my website hit Zapier and have Zapier hit this endpoint, and then it just works. So yeah, so I'm going to pick that talk, and then I'm also going to pick I can't even talk anymore. And then I'm also going to pick AWS Lambda, because it's just cool stuff.
Cool.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. We'll have some links to some of the resources we mentioned in the show notes about Rails 5.1. And yeah, if you have any other questions, put them in the comments, and hopefully we can get you some answers.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
All right. Talk to everybody next week.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.